As we would say down the road a bit at the temple, Shabbat Shalom, y'all. I must admit that as we were singing Shabbat Shalom together this morning, I had to hold back my temptation to sing Shabbat Shalom, hey, as our preschoolers often do during our Tot Shabbat program on Friday mornings. I am Cantor Tracy Fishbein. My pronouns are she, her, and I am visiting you today and sending regard from my clergy colleagues and community at the temple, Congregation Ohavai Shalom. It is truly a pleasure to join with you this morning as part of your Sunday worship. This is not the first collaboration between First Unitarian Universalist and the temple. Our clergy have long gathered together as part of the West Nashville Clergy Group and partnered for projects like our Habitat for Humanity Unity builds and, pre-COVID, our annual Interfaith Thanksgiving concert. And I hope that today is not the last time we'll gather together in fellowship, in song, and in spirit. I am grateful to Marguerite and to Holling and the whole fun team for a wonderful and meaningful morning, and especially grateful to you, Wes, for the invitation to share some thoughts and music with all of you today. As we say in Jewish tradition, Mazel Tov to you on your recent ordination. It is an honor to call you not only a musical colleague, but a clergy colleague as well. And it is an honor to be with all of you in this sacred space for this sacred occasion this morning. When Wes approached me about speaking with y'all today, he mentioned that you're spending some time this summer exploring pluralism within various faith groups. Well, little did he know, or maybe he did, that we could spend an entire summer talking about pluralism in Judaism alone. Let's just say, like many things in the sphere of religion, the idea of pluralism in Judaism is a bit complicated. There are various denominations of Judaism, various practices within Judaism, various customs and music and foods, depending on where in the world your Jewish practice originates. And of course, the old adage remains true that when there are two Jews in any place at any given time, there are always at least 3 opinions. What also remains true is that all ways of practicing Judaism are living and valid, and they are practiced here in Nashville, in the United States, and throughout the world, most of the time peacefully, and much of the time respectfully amongst all Jews. So this morning, to help us dig into the idea of pluralism in the modern Reform Judaism we practice at the temple, I will turn, as have scholars past and present, to the words of our sacred texts. In the Torah portion for the week that has just passed, Parshat Pinchas, or Phineas, from the book of Numbers, we learn about the daughters of Zelophehad. These 5 women come before the all-male leadership of the Israelites and demand the right to inherit their father's portion of the promised land. They tell Moses of their father's death and explain that they have no brothers, meaning their father's landholding will pass to the nearest male relative. I will chant the beginning of this tale in the cantillation traditionally used to read Torah in Eastern European countries and here in America. It's important to note that our cantillation systems in and of themselves sound different depending on which part of the world you come from. They are just another example of pluralism within Judaism. ותקרבנה בנות זלופחד, בין חפר, בין גלעד, בין מכיר, בין מנשה, למשפחות מנשה בן יוסף, ואלה שמות בנותיו, מחלה, נועה, וחוגלה, ומלכה, ותרצה. ותעמודנה לפני משה ולפני אלעזר הכהן ולפני הנשיאים וכל העדה פתח אוהל מועד לאמור אבינו מת במדבר והוא לא היה בתוך העדה הנועדים על אדוני בעדת קורח כי בחטאו מת ובנים לא היו לו. The translation. The daughters of Zelophehad of Manassite family came forward. The names of the daughters were Machlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He died for his own sin, and he has left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan, just because he had no sons. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen." And Moses brought their case before God. Without a male relative to advocate for them, the sisters have every reason to believe that their request will be dismissed or denied. Their status as orphans and unmarried women makes them particularly vulnerable. But Moses brings the case before God, who responds affirmatively. The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them. Moreover, God tells Moses to amend the inheritance law so that in other cases where a man has no son, his daughter or daughters will be the first in line to inherit. The purpose of this passage is not only to correct the injustice toward these 5 women, it is to preserve a record of the process of adapting divine law to respond to emerging human circumstances. In many ways, this text fits perfectly with what Reform Judaism is all about. Since its inception in the late 18th century in Germany, Reform Judaism has sought to adapt ancient Jewish practices to fit into modern times. Early reformers, influenced by the Enlightenment era in Europe, wanted to find ways to maintain their Jewish identities while also allowing themselves to enjoy the intellectual, artistic, and societal advances of the time, all things that a traditional Jewish upbringing would not necessarily allow. And so they turned to their neighbors in the Protestant church for inspiration. The early reformers did away with the traditional styles of dress, changing from their black suits and hats to street clothes, both during the day and in worship. They modeled synagogues to look more like those in the Protestant church and changed the music, incorporating traditional Jewish prayer modes into 4-part chorale-style singing, accompanied by pipe organ. They continued the long-standing Jewish practice of asking deep questions about our sacred texts, but allowed themselves to question the role of God in the creation of Torah. They created new versions of our traditional prayer books, providing translations of the sacred prayers and inspirational readings, all in the vernacular of the people, and so much more. The Reform movement continued to adapt and change as it made its way over to the United States at the turn of the 20th century. As Jews continued to move westward in the United States, Reformed synagogues began to adapt to the needs of people no longer living in areas with high concentrations of Jews. They began to create social programs, preschools, and brotherhood and sisterhood clubs to allow people to meet, socialize, and to have a place to call their Jewish home. More and more, our rabbis began to share messages from the pulpit that discussed not only Talmud and Midrash and other commentaries from our tradition, but also current events and pop culture. Reformed Jews began to learn that moments of holiness could be found anywhere, from the synagogue to the movie theater to the baseball field to the voting booth to the hiking trail, and everywhere in between. And as the civil rights movement gained popularity in the 1950s and 60s, it was very common for leaders of the American Jewish Reform movement to be seen marching with leaders like Martin Luther King and John Lewis. The temple's own Rabbi Randall Falk of blessed memory was active in the sit-ins and demonstrations here in downtown Nashville. The civil rights movement was a pivotal moment for American Jews as it emphasized the role of tikkun olam, the repair of the world, as a central platform within Reform Judaism. Standing up for those in need and working to right the wrongs in our society, just as Zelophehad's daughters did in last week's Torah portion, is one of the most important elements in Reform Judaism today, and one that brings as much spiritual fulfillment to so many of our folks as it does personal fulfillment. And speaking of today, Reform Judaism continues to be a leader in the adaptation and continuation of Judaism for nearly 35% of American Jews. We continue to grapple with the ongoing challenges in the political landscape of our country, encouraging our folks to raise their voices, to vote in local and national elections, and to engage in difficult but important conversations with open and listening ears. More and more congregations are opening up their doors to interfaith marriages and families, lending not only a congregational home, but resources and support for all members of the families, regardless of each person's faith background. We regularly perform marriages for and ordain clergy who are members of the LGBTQ+ community and work to change the gendered language of Hebrew prayer to allow anyone, regardless of gender identity or expression, to fully participate in worship. We recognize the full Jewishness of people of color and new immigrants to America. We try to create space for anyone, regardless of spiritual background, to worship with us and to work to join the Jewish people if they so choose, and so very much more. To us, as leaders of the Reform movement, one of the most beautiful and sacred parts of our work is to lift up the myriad of people in our congregations, people from so many different backgrounds, with so many different opinions and ideas and ways of living their own unique Jewish lives. It is those differences that make us such a special community, one that we are proud to lead and happy to continue the hard work of reforming our community for generations to come. Being a cantor, which is a music minister of sorts at the temple, I would be remiss not to share a piece of music with you that so beautifully exemplifies much of what I've talked about this morning. The piece I would like to share with you today was written by my teacher of blessed memory, Debbie Friedman. Some of you may be familiar with Debbie's music, as much of it has made its way into American religious culture, even outside of the synagogue. Debbie was a pioneer in the world of Jewish music. Until she arrived on the scene in the 1970s, most of Jewish synagogue music was performative, meant to be listened to and not sung by the congregation. Debbie had great respect for the traditions of Jewish music and synagogue worship, but she also knew the power of music to create societal, emotional, and spiritual change. She began to set Jewish texts in musically accessible ways, creating melodies often in English, set in the styles of folk singers like Joni Mitchell and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and meant to be accompanied on the guitar. Her music faced tremendous backlash by cantors and music directors throughout the country, but quickly gained popularity with the youth and many members of all ages of American Jewish congregations. Long story short, she quickly became the most influential composer of Jewish music to date. In fact, the program from which I received my own cantorial ordination, the same school that Debbie Friedman was rejected from in the late 1970s, now bears her name. And I am a proud graduate of the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Say that 10 times fast. This piece I'd like to share with you is called Lechi Lach and is based on the text from Genesis chapter 12, where Abraham is called on by God to Lech Lecha, to go to himself for himself on a journey to find his truest self. Debbie, the feminist that she was, changed the Hebrew for the word go from the masculine form in which it's traditionally written, lech, to the feminine, lechi, to also include women in this instruction from God. She always strove to tell the story of strong biblical women in many of her songs, and to give voice to the often silenced voices of women in our texts. To write in English alone was not enough, and so she adapted the Hebrew to tell her story her way. This song has become one of her most beloved pieces, and one that I am honored to bless all of you with this morning. To a land that I will show you. Lech lecha, to a place you do not know. Lechi lach, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. Lechi lach. And I shall make your name great. Lech lecha. And all shall praise your name. To the place that I will show you. L'simchat hayim, l'simchat hayim, l'simchat hayim, lechi lach. And you have been a blessing. You are a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. Lechi lach. Again, I am so grateful to all of you for having me here this morning, and I hope to continue these important conversations well into the future. For today, may we all work to be open to the blessings of our pluralistic Nashville faith community in all its beautiful denominations, and may we all find the strength to bless one another with acceptance, with peace, with joy, and with love. Shabbat Shalom.